Z Nation, Chapter 12 in the books. The Law of Receptivity. This is where Joe, last day of the weekly 5 days of learning all 5 of the laws of, I don't know why I always space out on this word. It's not a long word or whatever, but I just want to call it successful. Superlative. It's not superlative. Supertastic. That's not a word either. Regardless, learning the 5 laws for this week lead to success. This one being the law of receptivity. This is Friday, and he's over at Pindar's house. He's actually going to eats at Pindar's house, and it opens up the chapter talking to Rachel and actually getting a little more to know about Rachel and how Rachel, during her time, her almost working with Pindar for over a year, how she has gained so much knowledge in the form of finances, philanthropy, negotiation, networking, resources and relationships. Pindar's principles of cooperative commerce from A to Z. She has developed, implemented, and established a network of all the different regions of the world where you can grow coffee. There's an abundance amount of countries you can grow good coffee beans in, and she shared that she has established networks, connections in each one of those countries or areas of the world. Well-established friendship with growers in Sumatra, Indonesia, Kenya, Yemen. Do you know how many coffee producing countries there are in our little planet? This is when she was asking Joe. Joe said 20, more than 3 dozen. And over the last 12 months, I've developed personal relationships with coffee growers in every single one of them. Joe was stunned. And certainly Rachel could leave within 48 hours, leaving Pindar. She could easily start up her own first-class expertise business, from importing and exporting to international financing to management and human resources. Coffee bean empire. She's doing good. And again, it all came back to networking, who you know, building relationships, establishing valuable connections, getting to know people, and through that you have a well-invested, like-minded group of people, your network, that is just gonna flourish, and how successful you are to them, and then you receiving benefits from it, as long as you're open to receiving those benefits. And so, after he gets done talking to Rachel, he meets up with Pindar, and him and Pindar have almost like a philosophical, paradoxical moment of conversations, to where they start to talk about you cannot give without receiving. They go into detail as far as looking at, and this was an interesting reference I had to look up because I've never heard of this king before. But before I get to that, Joe, actually, he does a lot of the figuring out himself. How did it even start out? So what do you think this is all about? For the past 20 minutes, the two of them had enjoyed the most wonderful lunch of cold cuts, fresh breads, and an array of pickles, olives, radish, and they're like, Joe counted 5 different types of mustard, and he managed to sample every one of them. But he knew Pindar's question was not about the lunch spread. It was about everything he had seen and heard during this week. Joe hesitated and spoke carefully. I'm stepping from stone to stone across the river. I think it all sounds amazing, wonderful, really wonderful. He paused, feeling the spreading warmth in the late September sun. And, prompted Pindar, I'm just not. Joe looked a big breath and then let out, unable to finish his thought. Let me see if I can help here, said Pindar. When you were young, what did you learn about giving? Joe frowned in concentration. Pindar interrupted his train of thought before it had even gotten started. Don't think about it, Joe. Don't try to remember. Just tell me. When I say giving, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Leaps to mind. It's better to give than to receive. Exactly. It's better to give than receive, right? If you're a good person, that's what you do. You give. Good people give and don't think of receiving. But you think about receiving all the time. You can't help it, which means you're probably not really a very good person. So why bother trying? All this giving sounds great for some people. For people like me, maybe, or Nicole, or Ernesto, but not from you. It's not just who you are. Therefore, a moment of silence. Is that how it is? Joe sighed. Something like that, he admitted. Pindar turned and looked out at the city stretching off to the west. He seemed pensive, almost sad. He continued looking into the distance as he resumed speaking. I want you to try something for me. This is where it leads to more of a eureka moment, more of sparking off the light bulb in Joe's head. I want you to try something for me. I'm going to count to 30, and while I count, I want you to slowly exhale. Exhale for 30 seconds. That's pretty darn hard. That's all. Just exhale and don't stop. Take a good breath in first, so you have plenty of air, okay? Now breathe in and go. Exhale. And as Pender began counting, Joe began to slowly let his breath out. By the time Pender had reached 9, Joe was hunching forward and turning a bit pale. At 12, he straightened up and abruptly drew in a big gasp breath. Pender glanced at Joe, couldn't get to 30. Joe shook his head. What would you think if I told you it had been medically proven that it is healthier for you to exhale than to inhale? What would that make a difference? Puzzled, Joe shook his head again. No, of course not. You can't just go on exhaling forever, no matter what argument anyone gives you. What if I told you that it's better for your heart to relax than contract? To just keep opening up without squeezing down again. Will you give it a try? This time he didn't even wait for an answer. It's ridiculous, right? Of course it is. And so it is a bit of a traditional wisdom nonsense that you and I and everyone else had drummed into us. Traditional nonsense. Yes. The social norm, the system, as I like to say. Traditional nonsense. It's not better to give than to receive. It's insane to try to give and not to receive. It's like this example here, where by exhaling, you cannot continue to exhale. You need to take in. By exhaling, you are giving. By inhaling, you are receiving. So you cannot do one over the other. You have to do both. It's a two-way street. It takes two to tango, baby. Try not to receive is not only foolish, it's arrogant. When someone gives you a gift, what gives you the right to refuse it, to deny their right to give? Receiving is the natural result of giving. If you give and then try to stop the receiving that comes back, you're like King Canute. And this is a guy I had to look up because I've never heard this reference at all. King Canute, watching the tide roll out and commanding it not to come back in. King Canute, when I looked up briefly, I believe is from year 1000 or so, AC, after Christ maybe, or BC, one of the two. I want to say it's AC. So you're around somewhere year 1000. He's the king of, and it had like 3 countries. It was like Denmark, king of Denmark, Norway, and another one. But certainly during that time period, he played a vital role in conquering and sailing the high seas. And I wish I could go into more detail. I read a little bit about him, but I didn't retain that much, apparently. But main thing is King of Denmark. That's the biggest one. But yeah, just playing off this notion that, yeah, you want to watch the tides roll out, but you don't want the tide to come back in. That's nonsense. It has to come back in, just as your heart has to contract after relaxing. At this instant, all over the globe, all of humanity is breathing. This is cool. I like this quote. At this instant, all over the globe, all of humanity is breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. So is the rest of the animal kingdom. And right now, at this instant, all over the globe, the billions and billions of organisms of the planet kingdom are doing the exact opposite. They're breathing in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen. Oh, mind blown. Their giving is our receiving, and our giving is their receiving. Oh, you see the connection of the dots? Oh, I love it. In fact, every giving can happen only because it is also a receiving. And with that, Pender abruptly stopped speaking and gazed again out at the city and mountains beyond. Joe sat riveted to the spot as if in the aftermath of an earthquake. Every giving can happen only because it is also a receiving. For a full minute, neither spoke. Joe heard nothing but the confused rush of blood in his ears. It was as if he could hear the sounds of thoughts swirling in his brain. Then he became aware of his breathing, in and out, in and out, in and out. And he laughed. You can make the reference, I've talked to somebody about this before. When you inhale, you're always being born. And when you exhale, you're always dying. So it's a constant state of reinventing yourself and then letting go, exhaling, dying, and then reinventing, and then dying. It's just a thought that came to mind. Anyways, every giving can happen only because it's also receiving. We're going to keep rolling. This is a little long video, but I'm finishing strong with this law of receptivity. For a full minute, neither spoke. Joe heard nothing but the confused rush of blood in his ears. It was as if he could hear the sounds of thoughts swirling in his brain. Then he became aware of his breathing, in and out, in and out, in and out. And he laughed. A horse. Pindar turned out and looked at him quizzically. A horse, Joe repeated. To water. You can lead a horse to water. Pindar cocked his head and waited. But you can't force him to take the water you offer. That's the last law, isn't it? Retrieving. Choosing to receive. Pindar said nothing, nor did he move. He just continued to watch and listen. Joe's thought turning, coming in a rush. All the giving in the world won't bring success, won't create the results you want unless you are able to make yourself willing and able to receive it in like measures. Because if you don't let yourself receive, you're refusing the gifts of others, and you shut down the flow. Because human beings are born with appetite, nothing is more naturally geared towards being receptive than a baby. And if the secret of staying young, vibrant, and vital throughout life is to hang on to those most precious characteristics we all have as children, but which get drummed out of us, like having big dreams, being curious, and believing in yourself, then one of those characteristics is being open to receiving, being hungry to receive, being ravenous to receive. And now Joe's eyes were shining, as were Pindar's watching him. In fact, all those things I just mentioned, having big dreams and being curious and believing in ourselves, those are all aspects of being receptive. They're all the same thing as being receptive. Being open to receive is like. And here, Joe seemed to grapple for a moment. He spread out his arms and looked upwards, as if searching for a word big enough to convey his thoughts. It's like everything. Joe stopped. Pindar looked at him for a moment, then spoke. This certainly was designed with a sense of humor, wasn't it? Inside every truth and every appearance, there's a bit of an opposite tucked inside. Just to keep things interesting, Joe mused aloud. Yes, Pindar replied, nodding with delight. That's an excellent way of putting it. Just to keep things interesting, things are always a bit the opposite of what they seem. And this plays back to, I forget when it was and what chapter, but Pindar was talking about a lot of times things are deceptive of what they seem. So remember, you don't necessarily, you can never necessarily assume things are the way they are a lot of the times, whether that be a certain person and making the judgment call on them. Well, in this case, there's always a bit of an opposite of what they seem. So the secret to success, Joe went on, to gaining it, to having it, is to give, give, give. The secret to getting is giving, and the secret to giving is making yourself open to receiving. What do you call this law? Pindar raised his eyebrows. What would you call it? And Joe replied without hesitation, the law of receptivity. Pindar nodded thoroughly. Good. They sat together in silence for a long moment, contemplating the law of receptivity and the glorious irony of creation that tucks its greater truths carefully inside of paradoxes. Joe had a sudden thought that nearly made him jump. My lunch hour is nearly over. Who are we supposed to see today? Pindar looked over at him. Who were we supposed to see? You know, who was supposed to be the reveal the last law? The Friday guest. Pindar smiled. Ah, the Friday guest. That would be you, my friend. And he paused and said again, that would be you. The fifth law, the law of receptivity. The key to effective giving is to stay open to receiving. I'm open, baby. I am open.